Hi, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us for Universal Design for Learning in the Arts, a framework for inclusion, presented by Dr. Ryan Harrigan. Today's presentation is an Arts and Special Education webinar, which comes to you from the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts and addresses topics related to the arts, accessibility, education, and disability. My name is Debbie Siegel, and I am the Assistant Manager of Special Education, and I will be your webinar moderator this afternoon. The next Arts and Special Education webinar is entitled Using Improv Theater Games to Strengthen Academic and Social Emotional Skills for Students with Disabilities, presented by Jim Ansaldo. It will take place Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024 at 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Please check out our event page for upcoming workshops and webinars. And with that, I am delighted to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Ryan Harrigan. Dr. Harrigan is currently Professor of Music Education and former Director of the School of Music at Ball State University. He is a Focus 5 consultant specializing in arts integration for students with learning disabilities. In 2009, Dr. Harrigan co-founded the PRISM Project, which provides opportunities for college students to gain skills in teaching students with learning disabilities while providing arts experiences for children. This program has been duplicated in several communities across the country. In 2012, Dr. Harrigan provided a series of presentations for the Kennedy Center and has traveled extensively around the world providing professional development and demonstration teaching. Currently, in its third edition, Dr. Harrigan is the co-author of Teaching Music to Students with Differences and Disabilities, as well as Teaching Music to Students with Autism. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Ryan. Thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
So that's where I kind of came into the topic. I noticed early on in my studies that there weren't a lot of people advocating in the arts for kids with disabilities back in the early 2000s, and I thought I would give it a try. You'll see on the slide there, those are my kids. On the left there is Joshua. He has been diagnosed with autism in 2002. Now he is 24 and he just got a certificate in baking, and he's a fantastic Latin percussionist. And then on the right, my other son, Andrew, has also been diagnosed with autism, and he's a little bit more challenged from the perspective of autism. He's what I would call kind of verbal. He can put together a few words here and there to let you know his wants or needs. And he's an adult now, and he lives in a group home with other adults with disabilities. So why this subject? Well, before we get to that, I want to explain a little bit about the PRISM Project. So the PRISM Project is a theater, music, dance, and visual art program that we run here at Ball State, and it's run at 5 other locations around the country for kids with learning differences and disabilities. And what we work on is social and behavioral skills through the arts. And today I'm going to show you a couple of clips from the PRISM Project in reinforcing my points when it comes to universal design for learning. But let's go back to why I came to the subject of universal design. I was early on in my career, I was traveling a lot to state conferences and local school district professional development. And often I would get the question of how am I going to make these accommodations and modifications for a single person with a disability while still helping all of the other students in the class. And to be honest, I've always thought that was a really good question, and I tried to frame the answer the best I could. And then I came across this idea of universal design and universal design for learning, where you could make an accommodation for students with disabilities or exceptionalities, but some of those things might be applicable to all students. I'll give you a great example, an IEP. I feel like, and if you guys don't know what an IEP is, it's an individualized education plan. Don't you feel like, I'm going to ask this as a rhetorical question, but don't you feel like an IEP should be in place for every student at every school, not those with exceptionalities? I think IEPs would be great for all students to have. And I think that's an example of how universal design could be used for all students. So in about 2 weeks, a book is going to come out called Universal Design for Learning in Music Education, through Conway Press, and we just signed off on it yesterday, and it's probably going to take about a month to print. And through writing this book, I've learned a lot about accommodating students with or without exceptionalities. So let's talk about quickly what universal design versus universal design for learning is. So universal design is actually a architectural concept that was developed back in the 1950s by a gentleman by the name of Ron Mace. And Ron Mace was worried about an aging population, which ironically we are worried about right now with the baby boomers all retiring. And what he was thinking about was, how can you design a home where the design of the home was meant for someone in their 20s to stay all the way through their entire life and not have to be modified for, like, let's say, a wheelchair. And it inspired the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which I'm sure you've all heard of, buildings becoming ADA compliant with ramps and all of those good things. And the idea was, with universal design is, can we make a modification to a building that might be for, let's say, someone in a wheelchair, but it's also there for a mom with a stroller. The same idea, where we're going to make these modifications for a certain population, but they also might benefit everybody. So the folks at CAST, which we will talk about in a second, were inspired by universal design and came up with the idea of universal design for learning. And universal design for learning came about in the late 1980s. And it was a reaction to a study. Those of you who are my age might remember this, during the Reagan administration, a reaction to a study that called Nation at Risk. And Nation at Risk was a study that showed that we were way behind in math and science, kind of a second Sputnik moment, if you can allow me. And at the same time, the personal computer was becoming popular. And so CAST, which is an acronym for the Center for Applied Special Technology, attempted to, why can't we use this technology to universally design and redesign education to benefit everybody? So before we dive even deeper into the topic, I want to highlight something for your benefit. The CAST, or the Center for Applied Special Technology website, is fantastic. I use it probably every day, every other day when I'm working on things. It is very detailed, with lots of really great information. I took a screenshot here of the page that's of the most importance. The URL you could see on the previous page. If you go to udlguidelines.cast.org, you will go here. And at the top, you will see engagement, representation, action, and expression. Those are the three main principles of universal design for learning. And then under those, there's a drop-down menu that take you through guidelines and checkpoints to help you design your curriculum or design your lesson plan. And I just wanted to highlight that because I'm going to refer to it back and forth during this whole presentation, but it really is a great resource. One of the best websites I've used in my career. So let's get back to universal design for learning. So universal design for learning has three main principles based upon networks of the brain. Extensive brain research went into the development of universal design for learning. And the three main networks are the affective network, the recognition network, and the strategic network. And I just want to be clear that these networks are not mutually exclusive either. They work together, and everybody's networks work together in a different way. That's why you hear about people who are learn in different ways. And the idea is to understand these networks of the brain and try to provide strategies to maximize these networks when you are teaching. So the principles of universal design for learning are the multiple means of engagement, which is the effective networks, which we will get into, multiple means of representation, which is the recognition networks of the brain, and multiple means of action and expression, which is the strategic networks of the brain. So the first network of the brain, or the first principle of universal design that we're going to talk about today, is engagement. And UDL, Universal Design for Learning, proposes that we should be providing multiple means of engagement for our students, which is principle number 1. So going back to the networks of the brain, engagement is directly correlated with the effective network of the brain. So the effective network of the brain centers on emotion. This is where lust, care, play, as well as fear, anger, rage, panic, and sadness are all processed. Think about it. Why is this important? Well, oftentimes we are highly engaged in a topic that we care about, that we're passionate about. And that's why it's important to understand that the effective network of your brain is where you need to tap into in order for your students to be engaged. So what are the guidelines of engagement? And the guidelines are a subset. So I'm going to make sure the vocabulary is clear. Principles are the 3 big main areas. Under each of the 3 big main areas, there will be guidelines that we're going to talk about today that will connect to each of the main areas. So today we're going to talk about the guidelines of engagement. The first is choice and autonomy. I know in my profession, music education, and I'm hoping that my colleagues that are here agree, we don't do this very well. Offer choice and autonomy. We could do this better, especially I'm a recovering band director, and I know that my colleagues that are conductors are typically not all about choice and autonomy. They don't necessarily offer choices as far as rehearsal decisions, as far as repertoire choice, all of those good things. And I think that it's very important for us to provide different choices or different ways that students can choose their own path when trying to learn a particular topic. The second main guideline is relevance, value, and authenticity. If you're teaching something that students don't encounter in everyday life, or it doesn't really have any value, or it's not authentic to them, they're probably not going to be as engaged as if you did. I put this up here because I worked out in Clark County, Nevada a few times, which is the Las Vegas area school district. And they have one of the largest mariachi programs probably in the country. But it started out with some of the arts teachers understanding that what they were trying to teach, maybe Western European influenced art, was not connecting with their community. Now they have many mariachi teachers at every high school. They have a big mariachi festival every year. It's a valued part of the music program or the arts program in Clark County, and it's directly connected to the community, to the point of you can go to UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and you can get a degree in music education and specialize in mariachi instruction. So this is an example of how to make your content relevant to your students that you teach. I have a little clip here from a newsreel that you'll be able to hear how polished these mariachi ensembles are. I thought I would play this really quick so you can get an idea. So this is one of the Clark County mariachi ensembles that got to play at President Biden's inauguration.
Local mariachi band is receiving some well-deserved recognition from the Clark County Commissioners today. The band from Las Vegas High School performed virtually at President Joe Biden's inauguration last month. Mariachi Hoya received certificates for their great work at today's meeting. Also had a nice performance there. Inauguration was not the first time the group performed, though, for President Biden. The students played for him when he visited Las Vegas on the campaign trail last year. So that's what you call going full circle. Congratulations to them.
That's right. What an honor for
Yeah.
them. And they're so talented because we've done stories leading up to the inauguration. Oh, they're absolutely wonderful. So,
Young kids, and they sound great.
I know, nice to see them recognized.
Local mariachi band.
Oh, there we go. So I just think I think that the program's great, and it's so great to go into a rehearsal. The kids are just in it, and the great thing is they'll play a tune that oftentimes they don't need to use music because the tune is already sang at, you know, parties and other events around in the community, and the kids already know the music. They just have to put all of the parts together, which is great. And so let's go on to the next guideline, which is self-regulation and goal setting. We're going to talk about this here, and we're also going to talk about this at the end when we're going to close the loop. So this part of goal setting is allowing students to be involved in their own goal setting, and also being involved in self-reflection. And also, you as a teacher, are you allowing your students in on your goals as a teacher as well? So I'm going to put a music education example up here, but I think that you could definitely generalize this to other topics. So this is a practice sheet that I give beginners when I teach lessons. And it asks them, you know, what is my goal for the week, you know, when they practice. And instead of logging minutes or logging time, it's about accomplishments and about goal setting. So this one it gives them some guardrails, though. They don't have to narrate as much. They can circle a box and say, I can, or I'm having trouble with hot cross buns. It gives them a minute off to the side there to write why. And then at the end, after they finish their practice session, they also have a minute to self-reflect. For example, I feel great about my playing and my musical accomplishments this week, or I didn't practice this week, or I didn't accomplish much this week. And then you can, you know, follow up with your students and talk to them about goals, and talk to them about any accommodations or modifications that you need to make to those goals, with the idea that you're managing expectations. It's very important, and making students, you know, care about how they're progressing and being self-motivated to progress. But the most important thing is that we're helping them cope with failure. And I think oftentimes we don't let our students fail and don't let them self-reflect and recalibrate what their goals are for the next, you know, practice session, or the next week, or the next homework session. But the idea is to get them to be independent and intrinsically motivated to progress on a particular subject. And sometimes that could be infused with arts motivators, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. One of the last and final guidelines of UDL is fostering community. So those of you that are in, you know, performing arts programs or performing arts teachers, I noticed that there were a number of you that were registered. You know, we're lucky that we can do this through ensemble work or through, you know, production work. But how do you, in a math class, you know, foster community? You know, how can you get kids to want to come and learn together? That can be a very powerful engagement tool. And it's just something that folks that work with universal design think about. So UDL in the arts, what are some ways by which that you can infuse the arts in helping you with universal design? Well, one of them is movement. Can you get them up and moving as far as when they're learning a particular topic? Is there a way to infuse movement with math and science? I already know that there are, because there are teaching artists that I work with Focus 5 that actually make a living doing that. Is there a way to incorporate music and song into your lessons for those of you who are non-arts teachers? You know, is there a way by which that you can let them infuse visual art? Can they draw their answer? Can they paint you a picture of how they understand clouds and precipitation? You know, those kinds of things can be very powerful tools, especially when it comes to engagement. But the overall idea is to have learners that are purposeful and motivated themselves to learn. And yes, that takes years and years and years. But oftentimes I think that we underestimate younger students in how much they think about their own progress. So this is the end of the first segment out of 3, and I have a question to pose to you that we can, if you don't mind writing your answers in the chat. So you've heard some of my examples. I'm curious to hear some of yours. What techniques do you use with your students to engage them and keep them motivated? And those of you who are non-arts teachers, are there any arts related techniques that you use to engage your students? And I'm trying to get to the chat. Here we go.
I can read them aloud as well.
Oh, you can? Okay. Yeah, that would be great. And I can go back to sharing my screen.
Sure. Allison shared that we use a lot of special interests to keep motivation up.
Excellent. Anyone else? Don't be afraid to share.
We have another, oh yes, a few more. Victor shares, they get to pick their song that the class can listen to during specific times of the day.
Cool.
We often keep motivation up with a reminder that there is a show or sharing at the end of the week or at the end of class. We use hands-on when we can, so hands-on activities. We use music and dance to help students demonstrate science concepts. I'm seeing movement and student composition. We use a lot of incremental brain breaks, movement for focus. In a dance class, celebrate many different ways to show the concept. You can wiggle fingers at a high level, or jump high, or freeze at a high level. We use movement activities. Another said we also try to hit at least 2 sensory activities per lesson using
That's
different
great.
senses. Oh, I'm seeing tons. I use cooking at the end of the week to motivate students. We use Just Dance song breaks to get up out of our chairs. As someone with autism that is motivated by getting rewarded for breaks, that uses my special interest.
Those are excellent ideas. I don't want to cut anybody off. Did we read all of them?
There's one last hands-on activities and physical full body. We sign actors' contracts every class as well.
Excellent, excellent. Those are excellent ideas. I wanted to go also point out that, hold on, I'm getting back into my thing here. That the UDL website has some great examples here. Here's a screenshot from the actual engagement part of the UDL website, which you could find at that same URL that I gave you. I would just encourage you to go through and read. A lot of it is research-based and best practice-based, and gives, and they're very easily generalizable to all topics and subjects. So now we're going to go to the second main principle of UDL, which is representation. So representation, or multiple means of representation, is concerned with the recognition network of the brain. So the recognition network receives sensory information and processes it into knowledge. So the guidelines under representation are perception. That's the big one. How are the students perceiving the information? This is where you may have heard things like, I'm a visual learner, I'm an auditory learner, or I'm a kinesthetic learner. Wherever you perceive or you sense the information is where your brain starts to make sense of it. And however you generate that schema or that understanding of a topic comes from your perception. So UDL guidelines state that we should provide options for perception. We shouldn't always make it a visual representation or a auditory representation, and that we should customize it. So here's a music example of just notation. Notice that it's the same notation placed 3 different ways. That's a very simple example, but if there's ways by which that if I were going to do this 1 or 2 steps further, I would probably add manipulatives, to where they can place the notes in the correct order by manipulating some big manipulative, or I would have them do something oral, like, are they going to be able to, could they clap? Could they sing? Could they pat the different rhythms? The second guideline under the principle of representation is language and symbols. And this might delve a little bit into your students who might be ESL students or English as second language students, and that we need to clarify symbols and make sure that we're having a clear path for students to be able to decode information and understand those across languages. And there's lots of media out there, which we're going to get into later on in the presentation, that can assist with this. But I want to show you one example of a student, or a concept that's being represented in several different ways in order to accommodate a student who has English as their second language. So the concept here, and I'm a music ed professor, so I'm going to use a music example, is loud. But notice on here that the concept is being represented 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And you also could do that. I can't really do oral representations of this today, but I mean, you can also demonstrate it in an oral way. So the idea is to just represent things many, many, many different ways. The final guideline under representation is comprehension. And kids comprehend information if you can connect it to their background knowledge. So if you can connect your topic or your subject to things that they've already experienced, that's one way by which they're going to absorb it better. And you want to make sure that you're highlighting critical features and big ideas whenever you're bringing that over from their background and their experiences. So how about the arts and representation? So the arts can be a window into honoring the culture and the background knowledge, definitely. Like, for example, we've already talked about using, literature, music, art, whatever it may be from a culture. But the arts can also be a way to represent content differently. I'm going to give you one example that we do at the PRISM project. So we explore children's literature, which those of you who are elementary specialists might do this, or you might not. This might be a good technique. We use the idea of reader's theater, which reader's theater is a way by which students can act out a particular book or piece of literature. So we did Snowy Day, which is a great children's book about a snow day. And if you're going to notice, this is all the kids on the stage, by the way, all are challenged with autism spectrum disorder. And some of them are verbal, some of them are nonverbal. But the idea is to turn the book into a narrative and give them action verbs in order to complete tasks that end up looking like a play. So I'm going to play Snowy Day for you from the PRISM project. I just a quick warning that the sound on this is a little quiet. You might need to turn up your sound on your device in order to hear this. But this is the Snowy Day from the PRISM project.
One morning, the yellow group was fast asleep. As the sun crept through the window, they woke up, stretching and yawning. When their eyes fully opened, they ran to the window because they knew that they were going to have. They rushed to put on their snow clothes. First, they put on their snow pants, followed by their boots. Next, they put on their scarves, mittens, hats, and coats, making sure to zip their coats all the way up. They were ready to go outside. The yellow group grabbed the handle of their front doors, turned the knob, and opened the door. They shivered from the cold. The yellow group took a step outside and realized that their feet made tracks in the snow. First, they walked with their toes pointed in. Next, they walked with their toes pointed out. Finally, they dragged their feet through the snow. They were so tired that they fell down to the ground, and they decided to make snow angels. When they were done, they showed their friends their snow angel masterpieces. They saw their other friends from across the field, and they knew that they had to have a snowball fight. They gathered their snowballs. And when they were ready, they shouted, 1, 2, 3, ready, and they couldn't take any more snowballs. So they decided to team up and make a snowman. We're gonna try not to watch.
So you get the idea. You just turn the book into a narrative and you have the students act out. The great thing about accessibility with Reader's Theater is that you can either assign a kid, lines if they're verbal, or you can have them just pay attention to the action verbs. And doing it as a group even helps students be included even more because they'll do what their friends are doing. And it's a great way to explore children's literature in a different way of representing it, hence multiple means of representation. So the overall goal of representation is to have resourceful and knowledgeable learners. Very important. So I have another question for the chat. What techniques do you use to represent your materials in different ways? Non-arts folks, do you use the arts when you represent your material? And we're going to watch the chat for you to let us know how you represent material in your class. Anyone? There we go.
Right, I'm seeing some. The first one says concrete first and then abstract.
Excellent. I know it takes a minute to maybe think about an example.
Sure.
There we go.
In dance class, we model a concept, show photographs of dancers showing the concept, show stick figure drawings, and then have a poster on the wall with both English and Spanish.
Excellent, excellent.
Someone mentioned we talk first and then get up and try physically. Someone else mentioned using visual, tactile, and then auditory strategies. We have a comment. I often use songs or videos to support a message.
Excellent.
Visuals, movement, songs with lyrical movements.
Excellent.
Someone mentioned we don't use the arts, but we do have a more verbal communication as a neurodiverse team.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to move to, I'm pointing out one more time that the website, again, these are some of the guidelines under representation. We talked about perception and language and symbols, but look to the right-hand column. It says consideration 1.1. So they break down perception even more or language and symbols even more to give you ideas for your instruction. So again, I'd like to point out the website is a great tool. So now we're going to move into the final phase, or the third principle of universal design for learning, and that is action and expression. Principle number 3. And action and expression is focused on the strategic networks of the brain. So how your brain forms strategy to solve problems. So the guidelines of action and expression are, this is a simple one, physical action, very ways to respond or show understanding. And we talked about before with manipulatives, how can they physically show you their understanding? And the way the arts, I think, could be infused in there would be, can you show me by composing a song about the particular concept? Or can you show me by drawing a picture about this and explaining it to me? And it might open up, an avenue for them to express themselves. And then technology is a very important part of UDL. And we're going to get into a technology discussion a little bit later on in this segment. But there is some technology here that I think shows a point when it comes to expression. And I work with kids with autism a lot. And I don't know if you are familiar with BoardMaker. BoardMaker is a very old program, but it's still very used. And there's different versions of BoardMaker. But students on the autism spectrum often, well, let me go back. PECS stands for Picture Exchange Communication System. And students on the autism spectrum often, in order for them to be able to express themselves, use picture icons instead of words. So you could see here, this is a typical elementary general music lesson where you have Hello Song, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, Wheels on the Bus, the Goodbye Song. Here's some examples of some self-contained classrooms that I work with. There's some students here. You can see each one of them has like a column, and look at all the different icons that they use. Here's another example here. Oh, wait, that's the example. So it's just important that not only what we're talking about with UDL is important for all students, but there are certain parts of it that I think are important for kids that may be in a self-contained classroom. Another guideline is to provide opportunities that are fail-safe. In other words, when you're trying to start with having kids express themselves, use guardrails, meaning that design lessons that are fail-safe in order for them to boost confidence. I'll give you an example of an art teacher that I worked with here. I'm going to call her Mrs. X, and she worked at Twin Rivers School District in USA somewhere. And you notice that she's trying to teach in art class cityscapes. But notice that all you need to do to draw a cityscape is know how to draw a rectangle and a triangle. And it was amazing, the students who were able to access cityscapes either from either drawing one building or two buildings or five buildings. And all of those are, the guardrails are that all you have to know how to do is build a building with a rectangle or a triangle. Here's another example of a snowman. If you notice that there's simple steps, simple lines that just need to be drawn in order for a snowman to be constructed. But if you look at it, all you need to be able to do is draw a line, because the kids are given, this might be a little confusing, but step 1, the kids are given in advance. So they don't draw step 1. All they draw are step 2, 3, 4, and 5. And all you have to do is be able to draw eyes and a nose, and then a series of lines, ovals, and a circle. And it makes anything that you can do to provide them opportunities to express themselves that are fail-safe sometimes in order to boost their confidence. Another guideline of action and expression is multiple media and as tools for construction. in order to build fluency at multiple levels. So I put together some multiple media ideas, but I'm hoping to maybe get some of you to share in the chat some of the ideas that you use media in class for. So here are some of the ideas that I have come across, which Sketch School as artistic tools that, you know, kids can draw sketches of things. Notability, which is a note-taking tool that allows students to take notes, but also add videos and visuals. Scoop It, I don't know if you know about Scoop It, is similar to Pinterest, where your class can put together its own page and its own board. Jamboard, I don't know if you've heard of that. Scratch. What are some other things that you've used as far as technology in the general classroom? You can go ahead and put them up in the chat. And this is all about expression, where kids can express themselves in the digital age. Is there anything up in, oh, here we go. Symbol Sticks is great. I love their options for personalizing icons. Excellent. Thank you, Allison. Anybody else have any ideas for technology use? I know that we use Flipgrid a lot.
While we're waiting for folks to contribute, I actually made that comment to Allison. She had mentioned Symbol Sticks, and News to You, which offers wonderful resources, like for current events and things like that. So that can be a really great option as well through unique learning.
Okay, well, I had to throw out some music ideas for the music teachers in the room here. These are some that I use. Chrome Music Lab SoundStation is a little mini production. Incredibox is really good. It is a very similar to SoundStation, and it's a user-friendly, simple production tool where kids can make up their own songs and beats. Sketch a Song is specifically designed for younger students. It combines coloring, book style visuals, and simple manipulatives where they can move things around when it comes to music. Here we have one in the chat here. It says Lumia. Oh, and then Aiden said, I'm sorry, I missed the Make Music is great. Allison, yes. Formerly known as Smart Music. In my class, some students use Bitmojis to personalize our PECs. So we're talking about PECs is the board maker example that we used, or on your AAC devices. So AAC devices are assisted communication devices, and they're able to use Bitmojis to personalize things and make it a little bit more unique to themselves, which is great. All universally designed because, you know, any student could put together Bitmojis and put those in their own technologically, whether it be their phone or their tablet or whatever they're doing, would be great. So the final guideline for under action and expression is, well, I told you at the very beginning that I was going to come back to goals. In the very beginning, we talked about students setting their own goals or being involved in their own goals. But at the end here, tying a loop when it comes to action and expression, we need to, teach students to anticipate and plan for challenges after they fail once. When they set a goal, can they anticipate and plan for future challenges? And then also challenge exclusionary practices under expression. There's going to be things that we need to keep an eye on that may have biases in there for students that are from different cultures. Even some of the technology that we use, that we just talked about, we need to look at that from the lens of, students from different backgrounds and cultures. We need to look at those technologies from the lens of students with exceptionalities, all of those things, and try to alleviate any barriers that we can. But do you sit down and review goals and reset if needed with your students? That's the big thing. After they've accomplished or not accomplished, closing the loop means, did you sit down and debrief after they've had a summative assessment of some kind? That's very important. And I'm not sure that we do that often or set aside time enough, all the way from, learners that are just getting started all the way through, even with college students. I have to sit with students and say, hey, is this where you want to be? Where do you want to go from here? All with the idea that we have strategic and goal Ooh, hold on, we're not ready for that yet. Strategic and goal-directed learners. We want students to have goals. We want them to have plans, and we want them to be involved in their own learning. So I have one more discussion question for the chat. In what ways do you provide options for students to express their understanding of the material? For those non-arts teachers, do any of these techniques use the arts? Please feel free to put something in the chat. Okay, I'll give it another 30 seconds or so to see if somebody wants to contribute. Well, here we go. Mind mapping notes. Excellent. With drawing options. Thank you, Elizabeth. Make a video, draw, share. Excellent, Allison. Create a comic strip. Excellent. Create a pages or notes and ideas like for Jamboard. Excellent. Make choreography in group or alone. Verbally respond, draw, or write words. Pickers, where they flip, as it said, pickers or flickers? Pickers, where they flip the flicker right side up and demonstrate that they understand the material. Excellent. Draw, speak, or write. Thanks, Gwendolyn. Okay, so we're starting to get to the end of the presentation here. So again, I wanted to point out the website one more time of the UDL. This is a snapshot from the action and expression page. And you can see all of the considerations down the right side, lots of material there. This was definitely a snapshot into UDL. There's much more to it. However, I don't want you to be overwhelmed by all of this information. I would recommend going to the website or maybe picking up, a book, maybe my book, I don't know, and start small. Start with a UDL designed lesson, and then go to a UDL designed week or unit of lessons and see how that might work. And UDL is about putting in nuggets of universal design concepts and not to do it all at once. So I just wanted to make sure you weren't thinking that you had to lay a blanket over your curriculum. It really is something that takes time. So speaking of time, we have a few minutes left, and I am open for questions. I'm going to stop. Well, I'm going to keep sharing my screen. But I don't know if you can see my face, but does anybody have any questions? The first one says, can the book be ordered yet? Yes, I will put the information. I'll get that to Debbie with an exact link to the website that she could put in the follow-up notes for you to go to the Conway Press website to get the book. Yeah, it can be ordered. Absolutely. And it's pretty cheap and it's a pretty quick read. It's like 200 pages and a lot of that is references. It's a good read.
Great. So if you haven't already, now is the time to enter a question in either the chat box or the Q&A window. If you'd prefer to share your question aloud, feel free to use the raise hand button and we can promote you to a panelist so you can voice your question. And we have our first question, or our second question rather, in the Q&A.
Okay.
Anonymous attendee asked, how would you suggest adapting these principles to classes for adult learners?
Oh, yeah. Well, adult learners, I mean, I feel like teaching and learning relationship is the same no matter what age, you're working with. But adult learners, I work with a lot of adult learners. I work with undergraduate students all the way through doctoral students. And what I've learned is the same principles sort of apply. You're going to have engagement issues. Some adults are engaged into a topic, and again, you honor their background knowledge. You think about ways to connect it and make it authentic to their experience. It's very similar to working with kids. Same thing with representation. You think about, what is their lived experience every day? How can I connect that lived experience with with the content that I'm trying to teach? I can give you an example. I teach a doctoral seminar coming up in the spring, and last year, most of my students were non-American born students. I had 4 students from Korea, a couple from Japan, one from Indonesia. And really what I found is that I had to kind of uproot my normal lessons and think about, what their experiences are and how to connect. And that sometimes can involve them, like pull them into your office or your aside and say, tell me how, tell me a little bit about you, make sure that, you have an opening questionnaire about them and ask them, how can I connect the material more to your lived experience? And often they'll tell you, which is great. So I just think the principles still apply to all age groups. I can see the chat here. It says, okay. If you had 3 sentences to describe UDL to an educator who hasn't heard of it, what would you say? What is the most important parts of it? I would say the idea of 3 sentences. Wow, that's tough. You put me on the spot here. I would say universal design for learning is a concept that applies adaptations to oh my gosh, to many people that might, let me start over. I'd have to wordsmith that a little bit. I would say applies adaptations to one group of people that may benefit a larger group of people. Does that make sense? And I have a question. I work for a company that makes resources for the autism community. Do you think the UDL can apply to my company to be more inclusive in teaching? Absolutely. I wrote a book on autism. I work with kids with autism all the time. If you want to, Elia, reach out to me offline, maybe we can have a deeper discussion because we're running out of time. I'll put my email in the chat for you to contact me, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Debbie, I just have the chat open. I don't have the Q&A open.
We don't have any other questions in the Q&A,
Okay.
but we have about a minute more if anyone has a final question. Again, you can raise your hand if you prefer to come on screen. Ryan, I have a quick question for you. Could you give maybe an example or a couple examples of arts integration using UDL in special education settings, more specifically like a self-contained environment?
Sure. So I could play a video for you really quick. Let me reshare my screen. The concept here is I used the arts. I partnered with a Focus 5 acting coach. Name is Maria. And this is an example of using improv to help students with engagement and social skills and communication. And this improv game is called I'm a Tree. And I'm just going to play the video. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but this is a way by which we use the arts for multiple means of engagement.
In a circle, come on over.
To close with this, close with the game too, huh?
All right, guys, so we're gonna play a game. The game that we played before. Now we get practice at it. We're gonna play this game again called I'm a Tree. Okay, and I'm gonna be the first person To be the treat, and then you guys can come after that, okay? So here we go. I'm a tree.
I'm Williams. What are you? I'm a frog. Women.
Toby, what are you?
Toby, what are you?
Egg.
Oh.
I'm a squirrel. Women.
Oh. Spider. Okay, Elena, which one of these should we keep and start over?
A rabbit.
Oh, you're gonna be rabbit, okay. Which one of these should we keep and start over? Spider, okay, everybody go back to the beginning, to the end of the circle. So Joey, say, I'm a spider. Spider. Okay.
I'm the web.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I'm gonna get.
I'm the tree that the web is on.
I'm the mosquito trapped in the web. I'm gonna get something.
So you get the idea. The idea is with this improv game is you start with the tree, and then the kids get to pick what they want to be. That's in the sound or the live picturescape of being in the picture of being, you know, I'm a tree. And then you pick one of the things that are in there, which was the spider, and then you start the game over again. And you notice that we had our paraprofessionals, which were college students, helping facilitate or moving the activity along when the kids who were not as verbal were bashful about participating. And what we find is the more we play this game, the more we could pull the guardrails off, that like we talked about, and the kids would participate by themselves. So it's just called I'm a Tree. You can look it up online even, but it's a great way to get kids engaged in making really good eye contact with themselves and being social, and then also working on their language, which is a goal often in a self-contained classroom for kids on the autism spectrum, definitely.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Dr. Harrigan. And I also just want to say thank you to our caption support and our ASL interpreters. And thank you all to our webinar participants for engaging in the chat today. Please see the chat box for our feedback survey for this session. Your feedback is always appreciated. And thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.